Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This session is titled Payments Compliance 2025, Unlocking Operational Excellence. This is part 2 of Vixio's Strategy Booster webinar series. I'm Jack Halliday and I'll be guiding you through today's recording. Vixio understand that compliance teams are under more pressure than ever. Rapid regulatory shifts, limited resources, and the risk of silos slowing things down. Sharpen your strategy with Vixio Strategy Booster webinars designed for busy leaders who need to turn screen time into strategic advantage. In these sessions, we will unpack some of the toughest compliance challenges and provide practical, actionable steps you can apply immediately. In today's webinar, we will unpack the challenges associated with operational inefficiencies in the compliance function. Over the next 45 minutes, we will address optimizing existing teams instead of relying on increasing recruitment, streamlining the triage of relevant information through automated tools, shifting from reactive to proactive regulatory monitoring, and much more. This isn't about passive learning, it's about turning screen time into a strategic advantage. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. We encourage you to get involved, send in your questions, share your thoughts, and make the most of the live chat. If you experience any technical issues, whether that's audio or video, just drop a message in the chat box and our support team will be happy to help. And finally, today's session is being recorded. You'll receive a copy in your inbox shortly after the webinar, so don't worry if you'd like to revisit the content later. Now, I'm delighted to hand over to today's moderator, Adam Parkinson, editor at Vixio, who will be leading the discussion alongside a panel of experts. Adam, over to you.
Thanks, Jack, and welcome everybody to this Vixio Strategy Booster webinar. My name is Adam Parkinson. I'm the editor of the Insights team on the payments compliance side of Vixio. We cover regulatory developments around the world in the payments sector and produce analysis of varying lengths and quite a range of different content. I'm joined by a terrific panel today to talk about our topic, which is unpacking the challenges associated with operational inefficiencies in the compliance function. So we should probably jump in and meet the panel. I've got Louise Beaumont, an independent expert. Hello, Louise.
Hello.
And Pete Chapman, a partner at Richardson Lissac.
Hi there.
Hi, Pete. And Kate Jones, a compliance specialist at Carner Consult. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
Well, thanks to everybody for joining us today. In terms of the structure, we're going to keep things pretty informal. We'll go through a few questions. We'll get some insights from the panel. Hopefully, they'll have some interesting views. I'm sure they will. And we will hopefully have some time for audience questions at the end. So please do share any questions that you have. If we don't have time to get to them, we will answer them offline after the event. So let's jump in with our first question. What are the biggest operational bottlenecks in payments compliance today? Louise, maybe if I come to you first with that one.
Well, it feels to me manual bottlenecks are pretty big. You know, you've got legacy systems, you've got really human-heavy workflows, which means you get delays. You know, things get snarled up. I would imagine we're also talking about quite a few data silos. You've got fragmented systems all over the shop, which means that risk assessment can be tricky, can slow investigations down. We all live with false positives, things that flag up and alert, but they're not really real, and that drains your compliance resources. And there's always, you know, the resource constraints to start with. Nobody ever has quite all of the things in place that they would love to be in place to be completely optimal. And then, of course, there's that regulatory complexity. You've got more regulations coming all the time. You've got a more global environment all the time. And you've got updates. So it's not just more regulation, but it's updates and changes to existing regulation. So for me, those, I think, are the big 5 bottlenecks that I see all the time.
Yeah, and those are kind of typical things across the board, really, aren't they? The things that we've seen in the past and are constantly trying to solve for. Kate, is there anything that you'd add to that list?
I would probably slightly answer the question differently. I absolutely agree, Louise, what you've talked about. But the other thing I'm very cognizant of in the compliance world is often compliance can be the bottleneck or perceived as the bottleneck. And one of the kind of core kind of mantras, as it were, in my world that I am very wedded to is the concept that you need to have compliance in the strategy decisions, in learning what's coming up, because often you find that a business decides to change a process, or they decide to grow in a particular area, whether it be a particular functional or from a geographical point of view, and they don't involve compliance right at the beginning in those discussions. So they kind of, you have the sales team, you might have the ops team, in some cases the legal team, involved in working out what you should do and how you should do it, but you don't often involve compliance at that point. And then as you go down the road, everyone's thinking it's a great idea, everyone wants to do it. Compliance often has to come in and then say, I'm really sorry, but have you considered this? Have you considered that? Which often people surprisingly don't want to hear at that time, because they're so excited about the idea, they think it's a growth strategy, off they go. And so I am a very firm believer, as I said, in compliance being in those meetings right at the beginning, so that they can provide that advice, they can be proactive, and therefore they're not seen as a bottleneck further down the line, when they just, in some cases, have to apply some common sense and some logical thinking to what the proposals are, which can often be not taken in the most constructive manner, should I say. Whereas if right at the beginning, when the concept is being thought about, or you're very much in the theoretical aspects of it, those advices and that guidance can be really beneficial to people to build out exactly what they can do, how they can do it, when they can do it. So I would often contradict people who say compliance is a bottleneck. I would say compliance, you haven't used compliance to the most efficient manner, you haven't used them in the most efficient way, and that's why you're seeing them as a bottleneck.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of gets to where the role that compliance can play in an organisation. And it shouldn't just be sort of marking the homework at the end. It's something to be involved in at every step of the way.
Yeah.
Pete, is there anything that you'd add? Any other bottlenecks? Or have we covered everything off there?
I must say that's an awful lot covered. The only thing that I would really add, and perhaps it straddles both Louisa and Kate's points, is just about compliance remaining nimble, particularly as firms scale. It can be really easy to get drawn into the specializations that are necessary through that process. But what was often a shame to lose sight of is that ability for the teams to have multiple specialism, or at least work and collaborate across teams, so that one issue, that one client, that one product that has multiple flags attached to it, those can be resolved, together in a roundabout and a complete fashion, rather than treating things in silos. I think that speaks to compliance's effectiveness, but also, as Kate says, compliance being embedded within the business and being a passport to the business in moving forwards.
Very much so. Yeah, and that sort of sense of what compliance can offer is something that can sort of lead into the next bit about different tools that are available for compliance. So thinking about maybe automation, AI tools, what difference can they make in terms of compliance's role? Kate, maybe if I come to you first on that.
Yeah, I think automation can, I think with anything, any tool you use, any operational process you change, it always needs to be efficient and it needs to be adding value. And I think that probably is kind of very extreme in the compliance function. And part of the reason I say that is no one really wants to spend money on compliance at the end of the day, as in they do absolutely see the value in it, but often to try and get a system over the line in a compliance team can be 10 times harder than saying buying an operational system or buying a claim system or buying, in some cases, a risk system. So because and the main reason I would say that is because if everything's fine, as in there are no regulators at your door, you're not being fined, no one's interested in you, from a business perspective, you're doing a great job. That's even if you're struggling in the compliance team to keep your head above water and manage everything, from a business perspective, you're doing a great job. So people often don't see the value in buying a system or making efficiencies because, well, what's the problem? Nothing's gone wrong. You're doing fine. You're doing a wonderful job in our business. But I have to say, I think there is an awful lot to harness from the use of AI but I think it needs to be really controlled, really managed, and you really need to be clear on actually what the focus and the outcome is you're trying to achieve, because I think there are an awful lot of things out there where people are pushing AI and selling AI, and some of it can be hugely beneficial, but some of it in some ways actually, when you take it down to what you need to achieve and how you need to achieve it, may not be as beneficial to you as you may think. So I think it's, what I would say is, absolutely, I think systems can be efficient and can harness great efficiencies, but you have to be very cognizant of how to do that, and in some ways be mindful of what you're buying and how you're going to implement it, and also how it interacts with other things within the wider company as well.
Yeah, I think there's probably a risk of rushing ahead with AI. As everybody's talking about it at the moment, and we see in sort of small scale use cases where it can be really advantageous. But if you rush ahead with it in an area like compliance, it's creating an extra layer of risk, I think, almost.
Yeah, and I would probably say compliance is one of those functions that you could, I don't believe, and I'm saying this, other people may believe different, but I don't believe AI could ever do a complete role of compliance. I think there is always a need for a human interaction, a pragmatism, a judgment, but absolutely there is definitely a use for it within the function. It's just making sure you engage with that and find that use.
Louise, I saw you nodding there. Is that similar to
Yeah.
your take on AI?
No, I was largely agreeing. I think there's, we're at that stage in the AI adoption curve where everybody wants to hear AI can do everything, and then you've really got to pick the bones out of it and think about where it can really make a difference. And I think, smart alert triaging might be one of the places it could make a real difference, because it's about that learning and prioritization of what really are high risks. So, and versus what's and suppressing any obvious false positives. I think there's an application there. I also think asking yourself some questions about is this helping me get more real time, or is it just going into an ever greater level of detail? If what you want is more detail, great. If what you want is more real time, great. But understand what outcome you're driving for, and always ask yourself the question: is this helping me prepare a better audit trail? Am I able to explain what's happened better, or is there a certain black box element here where I've got no clue what happened? And finally, a question would always be, is this really helping me scale? Is this helping me do scalability in a way which is more cost effective? I'm not having to hire lots of extra people, because that's competitive, right? Hiring is always a competitive game. So those would be the things that I would think through. Is it really helping me get smarter? Is it helping me be more real time? And is it helping me scale and drive towards ticking the AI box if it says it helps you do all of those things and you understand what it is doing?
Yeah, the understanding's a really key point, isn't it? Because if you can't account for the decisions that are being made, you're in trouble.
Yeah, auditability. Remember that.
Well, absolutely, and building on that, that's something that the FCA, from the regulatory standpoint, has repeatedly flagged up as a concern for it. I mean, the starting position for the FCA is that it is endorsing AI and the adoption of these tools. It's only a suspicion on my part, but I think some of the FCA's recent enforcement actions itself have been brought about as the result of the FCA using AI to review some of the data that it receives. So it is encouraging its use in the market, but at the same time, the concerns that we're talking about now have been raised. The FCA has drawn out compliance with the consumer duty and how that will work with AI, how disruption and continuity planning can play out if suddenly there is a problem. What is the backup if we put all of our eggs in one basket? And then to Louise's final point there, explainability, how you can contest AI decisions, how those are recorded, how redress would happen, are all issues where I don't think we have clear answers for the moment, but we have to be thinking about them, we have to be recording, and we have to have policies and plans in place, because these are the issues that the regulator is thinking about.
Absolutely. So for my next question, I want to touch on something that Louise, you mentioned, the competitiveness of hiring compliance staff. How best can organisations attract and retain compliance talent in that kind of competitive market?
I think there are a couple of things, one of which is, think about your purpose and your culture at the organisation level and at the compliance kind of departmental level. I think it's really important to explain to anyone who's even thinking about compliance as a career path that this is kind of mission critical. It's not an idle occupation sitting off to the side. It's really mission critical to the organisation, to protecting the organisation, to protecting its customers and everybody's reputation. So it's a really important function. So think about that. Make sure that that's kind of known and understood. But also make sure that you've got proper career paths and that people can see where it is they can go, either within compliance, being ever more specialist, or that it's actually a very recognised and important part of building your kind of leadership credentials, because you've understood every part of the organisation, including that of compliance. And the other thing that I really emphasise is the fact that technology is coming into the compliance world at ever increasing speed, and therefore your chance to be at the cutting edge of some really interesting technologies is actually a box that you can tick if you sit within the compliance team. And if you're not as tech enabled as you would wish to be, you're probably going to lose out on talent to those organizations that are, because they'll see it as part of their part of a career path that they can offer people who come to that department or to that organization. So those would be the three kind of things that I would think about.
Kate, does that kind of agree with what you're thinking on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably pick up on your mission critical point, Louise, as in a lot of firms, and I say this generally, not just in a compliance sense, like a firm's culture is so key to retaining staff and recruiting staff. And a lot of people, shall we say, believe their culture is one thing, but in reality it's another thing. And as part of my business, I run it with another lady, and she does a lot of employer brand projects, and that is quite a key theme, where it's people believe the culture's this, but actually it is really that. And I would say compliance can be quite a contentious role. You have to sometimes say things that people don't like or want to hear. You sometimes have to have more, shall I say, more confrontational discussions than perhaps you would in other areas. And that's not that you're having an argument with someone, but you sometimes have to say something and be comfortable saying something and be confident saying something. And I think that really does come back to culture. Some companies do really embrace and value what everyone brings to the table, whether it's something they wish to hear or not hear, and other companies don't. And it really comes back to that cultural piece of, do you feel comfortable in your environment that you can speak up? And I think anyone who works in compliance, if they work in an environment that is hostile to what compliance brings to the table, no matter how much you say your culture is a no blame culture or whatever kind of vision statements or mission statements you have, if ultimately someone's working in compliance and they don't feel comfortable speaking up and they don't feel like they can do their job properly, you will find that they leave quite quickly. So that will impact both your retention and your recruitment, and word gets around. And you will often find, to me, a red flag is that if a company's had quite a few compliance people churning in and out the door, that would be a big red flag to me. So I think, there's the obvious things of recruiting and salary and all the rest, but I think to retain people and retain the good people, actually your firm really needs to believe compliance is mission critical and behave like that in everything they do.
You've really made me think about that, Kate, because I was I'm not going to name names, but at one big incumbent organization, the head of the particular product in question kind of ignored the work of the policy team, considering it, this is completely irrelevant to product development, so I'm going to ignore it. And this attitude persisted until a really strategic decision was made to call for regulation in a particular area. And when the product leader realized, oh, that means my this is going to require more compliance, I'm going to lose some of my product budget, it's going to go into compliance with this regulation that we suddenly seem to be calling for, and I didn't want it in the first place. And they sort of had this dramatic, not to say nuclear reaction to this. And what it did was it highlighted a really significant cultural clash between countries. The product leader and the organization itself was very American and believed at a cellular level that market-driven solutions are absolutely the right thing to do, and regulation is irrelevant, which it is an extreme position, but is and it works in some areas in America, in some product areas in America, absolutely works, but not when building global solutions, because significant chunks of the rest of the world actually prioritize regulatory frameworks because it's about safe innovation, hence the policies team's position in the first place. This was a highly regulated market, and the position made sense. So I guess the moral of the story is bake cultural understanding into your cake and make sure that it's coupled with an understanding that compliance is not a drag on your product. In many cultures, in many countries, it's actually the baseline of your product. But certainly that was an interesting experience. And Kate, you just brought it back to life for me.
Yeah, and I think, Louise, the key thing I also say a lot is it really has to come from the top. Like the emphasis has to come down that, you might be in cross-functional, setups, you might have multi-geographical companies, but your culture has to come from the top of how you behave and how you treat people and how you engage with people. And I often talk about the concept of some people like compliance in the shop window. They like them on display, they like them on the website, they like to call them out for things, but as soon as you shut that shop door, it's like, well, thank you very much, you've done your job. We don't really want to hear what you've got to say. We're just going to run our own show inside the shop, as it were. And those kind of environments can be really toxic for people that work in compliance, and that's often where you see the turnover and the inability to hire people, or you are hiring people but you're having to pay an awful lot to get them through the door.
And to circle back on the mission critical, it's an increasing touch point for authorization and getting your foot in the door in the first place. The vetting of compliance all the way up to the MLRO is grown in significance in recent years, and we've seen that coming to the fore. And taking this point around culture down to the nuts and bolts, what we're seeing common pinch points in finding that key team, that key person, and sometimes that in itself is the chicken and egg you get around regulation. It's that we feel we need this talent through the door to get us over the line, but that key talent is nervous until we are in fact there. There's that tension that exists. So what you have to do is you have to, as everyone has said, bake in that culture and look at some of the points as to, these are, important roles. Where are they physically located? On a day-to-day basis, where are they? What access do they have to the business? Where is the MLRO situated? Do they have the third-party support that they need? And how do we tell talent? How do we prove this to talent? To bring them in, to retain them, and to keep them with the firm. I can't emphasize it enough. It's incredibly, incredibly vital.
And it's not an easy thing to do at the recruitment stage, I guess, to convince people of what your culture is like. Because as you pointed out, Kate, you can say all the right things, but what things are like on the ground are often a different matter. So presenting yourself well and demonstrating that you have good retention already and those kind of things must be a really important part of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I would probably say, Adam, as well, whichever sector you're in, probably for all three of us, word gets around, people who know people who know people. So if people continually have a bad experience in one particular place, you will often know someone who knows someone who's had that experience. So I think sometimes people forget that while we might be in a large large environment,
Yeah.
often the sectors that you work in or the people that you know, word of mouth is still a big concept.
Yes, and once again, the regulatory environment in which we work are relatively small. You won't have to go far to see, regulatory speeches referring to how often MLROs move around the market. Not always with entirely fair criticism there, I would say, but nonetheless, it's important that we know that the regulator is watching this.
Very good. So moving on to our next question then. Thinking about how teams operate, how can they ensure that they act on relevant, actionable information without ending up overwhelmed by kind of the flood of data that's available? Pete, maybe if I come to you first on this one.
It's an interesting one. It's probably the greatest risk in compliance above doing nothing at all. It's the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. What I probably see most often is not having a question with your compliance. It's trying to absorb all of the data that you possibly can and just move everything forward simultaneously as some sort of shapeless mass. And looking at the data is really important. There's a lot to be learned there, and we can find new paths back to issues from doing that. But I don't think that's to exclude looking at it from the other end of the telescope. Look at your own risks, look at your exposures, and consider what data can be used to help address those. It creates a much more positive, tailored risk management process. You are moving towards known bespoke risks, and it gives a trackable, identifiable set of goals, which not only must be good news for the business, but I will keep coming back to the regulator, allows you to explain what you are doing far more clearly, and how it is tailored to your business than trying to do all things for all issues. I think that's at the core of it.
Yeah, having a sense of exactly what it is you need to be thinking about and not trying to take in everything. Louise, is that the same sort of answer that you would give, or you got anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly say, take a risk-based approach. You'll know for your business, for your use cases, what are the higher risk areas. So always think about that. But the thing I'd probably add is more about periodic tuning. It's a bit like a violin or a piano or anything like that. You've got to continually keep tuning it to make sure that it's optimal. And you can't just assume that the same assumptions that you made the last time you tuned the musical instrument, your compliance, is going to be the same the next time you need to do it. So you've got to have some kind of calibration, some kind of way of looking at it that allows you to periodically and thoughtfully tune your model so that you are optimized for the risks, because those risks don't stay static. They're always morphing and changing, and you need to adapt and tune your model to catch those risks as they cloak themselves, as they change their shape and form.
Very much. Kate, is there anything that you'd add on this one?
So one of the things I would just probably feed in, which probably kind of covers components of what Pete and Louise have already said, is I am an absolute staunch supporter in you need to understand your business inside out. You need to know every process. You don't need to run it, but you need to understand how every single cog fits together and how ultimately your business drives forward. Because when it comes to the, as you've talked about, Pete, the massive information that we've all got to digest and work out where our risks actually are, you need to be able to take what has come through the door as the latest regulatory change or whatever it may be, and process that in your head. Is it relevant? Which departments does it apply to? And you also need to do it from a reverse perspective, as in someone wants to change a process, someone wants to do something different. What impacts does that have? And so when I have people working for me or when I'm training people, I am such a staunch supporter in, you need to know this business inside out, because to do a good job in compliance, to even be able to analyze the risks and implement changes, and as you said, do the fine tuning, Louise, you absolutely need to know what applies and what doesn't apply. And if you don't know your business, you can't make that judgment as a starter for 10. So I think it's really important, but I think naturally as compliance people, there are probably everyday things that keep you up and worry you, but you just have to trust in your capabilities, the team around you, the processes, the procedures you have in place, and if they're not working, as you said, Louise, you fine tune them, you improve them, you make them better. But absolutely understanding what your business does and how it does it is critical to being able to do that.
And once again, we're kind of coming back to the centrality of compliance to the mission of the business, which seems to be a real theme that we're touching on here. So moving on, how can compliance be positioned as a business enabler rather than a blocker? Again, it's the perception of what compliance is within the organisation. How can you put a good spin on what compliance has to offer? Louise, if I come to you first on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on something that Kate said way back when in the beginning of this panel, was around early involvement. If you treat compliance as the department that says no and avoid them at all costs, it's going to be really tricky, because you're not going to have a product that works and the regulator isn't going to be happy. So involve them really early on in the product development, because you want to try and preempt, to understand the regulatory hurdles and how to get over them with a degree of grace and elegance. I'd also make sure that everybody understands that without compliance, you don't have your customers' trust. And it's not just, an inconvenient and annoying department internally. If we have breaches, if we get things badly wrong, our customers experience that, and they don't love us as a result. So we've got to track this all back to, it really matters, because it matters to our marketplace, it matters to our customers, as well as, of course, as Pete keeps telling us, it matters to the regulator as well. For those people who care about cash, I point to the reason you want to involve compliance and see them as a really core part of your business is because if you can have faster onboarding, for example, of clients, if you can have fewer false positives, if you can improve your customer acquisition and retention, therefore, that's really good for revenue. So, and compliance can help you have a smoother process, which means that you can make money with fewer frictions and with less problematic incidents occurring. So it matters to cash as well. And I think I would also say I recognize everything everyone has said about it's really important to have great people in compliance, and I completely agree. It totally is. But it's also, or it shouldn't be, some kind of technology backwater. This is the compliance department has every right to be as technology enabled as any other department in the business, and to be as relevant and as useful and as invested in as any other part of the business, because it's absolutely crucial to revenue, to customer trust, and to regulators understanding, not just believing, but understanding that you're doing a really good job as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Pete, is there anything you'd add to that?
Just one thing, really, sort of taking a step back and looking at the macro role that compliance plays. I agree with everything that Louise has just said. But I mentioned before about compliance being a passport and a sort of fast track to moving the business forward. One thing that I see time and again is that firms with good, structured, ordered compliance are quicker. They are nimble. They, again, to Kate's point, they understand the business. And so when a new product, a new jurisdiction, a new regulation comes out, you understand where you are and you can build on that. You can tweak that in a structured and orderly way, usually cheaply and quickly. Whereas if you're building on top of ad hoc solution on ad hoc solution, it sort of builds up into some sort of Jenga tower. Every time you want to do one of those things, you want a new product, a new jurisdiction, you have to go back to the drawing board, chances are. You have to look through everything to see how it will interact, how everything will integrate, how this new position will fit in with everything else. And that is costly and that is time consuming. So you will be behind the market in doing so.
Yeah, having to start from scratch every time is just a bit of a nightmare, isn't it? Kate, anything else you'd say on representing compliance positively?
Yeah, I would definitely absolutely agree with you, Pete, on that point, because and people, I think people don't really appreciate the cost in doing that, or the value in actually having core processes and building a solid framework. And I would also say that compliance isn't a department that naturally promotes the positives they've done. And I am a firm believer in saying, we've changed the process, we've saved X amount of money. We, talking about your point, Louise, false positives, we've reduced false positive matches by X, saving business Y. I always like to tell, obviously there are negative and positives in life across the board, but I do like compliance to also tell positive stories of what they've achieved, not just we haven't got a fine and the regulator hasn't been in, or we haven't had some kind of enforcement action, which is sometimes compliance can tend to just focus on what hasn't gone wrong as opposed to what has gone well. And probably the two other points I would say in terms of talking about compliance as a blocker is firstly coming back to the point on culture. You will often find the people that see compliance as a blocker are often the areas where the culture isn't great and doesn't embrace compliance and doesn't see it as a core role. And that's the first point. So they don't embrace it when they should. They don't use it to its best value. They just see it as someone who's going to come along and say no. And the second point I would say, and again, I'm really firm believer in this, is making sure your compliance team is friendly, is open, is approachable. And I purposely, whenever I'm working with a new firm or in my previous life when I worked in companies, I get to know every single person in that office. Whether they want to know me or not is another question, but I get to know them. I have lunch in the kitchen with people, I chat to people, because at the end of the day, one of your best deterrents in compliance is people feeling they can come to you either when something's about to go wrong, could go wrong, or has gone wrong. And if you as a team are in a corner with a face like thunder, don't speak to anyone, sat behind a screen, people are not going to find you approachable, and they're not going to come to you when they need to. They're going to come to you when it's absolutely gone cataclysmically wrong. And that is not anything you then have an ability to change or improve on. You are absolutely firefighting a kind of nuclear bomb that's about to explode. So I am always very much, we need to be open, we need to be friendly, we need to be positive, we need to be engaging with people, because that also is a huge factor in how well you can achieve your job.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's being embedded within the organisation again, isn't it? And playing that key role. So we're moving towards the end of the conversation now. I've got one more question. So I would take the opportunity to remind the audience that we will be taking audience questions at the end. So please do get them in. But the last one for me, what practical steps should firms be taking right now to ensure that they're maximising operational efficiency? Kate, maybe if I should come back to you with that one first.
So I would probably say for everyone out there, a bit like you've talked about, Louise, with the fine tuning, take a step back, look at your compliance function today. What is working well? What is maybe not working so well? What are the pain points for that team? What are you demanding of them? Do they have the capacity to do it? Are you in a big growth phase? Are you not in a big growth phase? Are you trying to get your BAU back in order? Really fine tune your compliance function, because ultimately, firstly, listening to them and engaging with them on what their pain points are, because as I said previously, people see compliance as it's all going great like a swan. But often you will find, as I use quite regularly, the swan analogy, people view compliance like a swan coasting along because everything's great in the business, but actually often your compliance function are pedaling like absolutely mad just to keep themselves above water. And that can often be really draining on people. So I would say the first thing is, after this call, go and ask them, what are you struggling with? Is there anything we can help with? You know, are there any systems, processes, things that you need help with or that we can talk about, and see what the answer is.
That seems like good advice. Pete, anything from you?
I agree entirely. It's the one thing to do after you've watched this. Where the inquiries come from, where the enforcements come from, are time and time again when firms get away from themselves because of the market, because of the regulation. We've had a huge amount of regulatory change over the last couple of years, but as Kate says, firms are in all stages of growth and development in any event, and it's the impossible ask of, amongst everything else and the BAU, to find that moment to step back and say, if I was building this today, it's not where it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago with the changes that we have required. But if I built it today, what would it look like? What is the delta from that to where we are? And is there some smoothing out we can do? Back to what I said a moment ago, the more of the Jenga that compliance becomes, the more gaps, the more fragile it becomes. So if we can shore that up from time to time, then I think that's time very well spent.
And I'd add to that, make sure you've got some data. If you are running that compliance department, make sure you've got some data. Make sure you're benchmarking. Make sure you've got some KPIs. Make sure how you're performing against those KPIs, because it's part of building that case that you are either operationally highly efficient, your case resolution times are really great, or your very low false positive rates, whatever benchmarks you want to have, or that builds your case for investment in the department. If you can see that those have dropped off over time, or the number of regulations that impact your business has changed, or the complexity has changed. So make sure that you've got the narrative, but also the metrics, so that you can appeal to both right and left brains of everyone else who's competing for that scarce resource called time, attention, and investment.
Brilliant, thank you. So moving on towards the end then, we'll get to some audience questions in a minute, but I just want to put to the panel, is there anything that you were hoping to get across today that we haven't already covered?
I don't think anything from me, no.
No, I'm happy.
Nothing coming up. That's a really good sign. Hopefully that means we've answered lots of questions. Brilliant. So let's have a look at the audience questions. Okay. What emerging technologies or practices are likely to transform payments compliance in the next 2 to 3 years? Anybody fancy taking that one on? Nobody jumping ahead. I'm going to throw it to you then, Kate. What do you think is coming up?
So obviously, I would say currently in terms of regulation, very much from the general sphere, particularly with the UK regulation, it's very much embedding, I would describe it as in lots of regulation has come out recently and our firms actually doing what they should be doing. So I do not see any kind of brand new regulation coming through the door. I do not see anything massively significant, but really the question now is, have you embedded it all appropriately? Have you met what you should be doing, and can you evidence that?
I think that's
yeah.
Sorry, Adam. I think that's right. It's not really a new practice. It's what we were just saying. It's
fix your Jenga.
Fix your Jenga. I'll coin that. It's the old advice that we should all cling on to is keep an eye on these things, take what moments you can to reassess and make things line up. A habit of the regulator when there's been a series of significant changes is to wait 9 months, a year, and then start asking questions. How have you employed this? How have you changed? How have you adapted to it? And the answers to those questions only come with some reflection.
For me, I think it's around eyes on the horizon rather than nose on toes. You want to be constantly looking forward. You want to be constantly looking at the horizon for those regulatory challenges, of course, but also for the technologies which are going to help you and assist you in being better at what it is that you do. There's always interesting technology looking at tracking of global regulatory changes, so you can actually understand maybe some of the nuances in those changes. I'm curious, and I think we've all talked about it on this on this panel, about AI and how much of the AI dream actually comes true. But when evaluating it in a year's time or 2 years' time, I would ask myself the kind of, has this made a difference? Am I still in the reactive remediation phase, or am I in the proactive compliance phase? And maybe it's those bigger questions, as Pete talked about, the sort of the graver reflections. And rather than getting lost in the swirling noise, you can ask yourself that question, has this helped me move away from reactive remediation and move towards proactive compliance? Because if I've done that, then I've also been much smarter about how I'm deploying money, how I'm deploying technology, and how I'm running and efficiently running my business, whether it's onboarding clients or keeping them happy and reacting only to those things which are genuinely a risk to the business, rather than jumping at every slamming door.
Yeah, and I would say, Louise, being proactive gives you so much more clarity and thinking space to actually make the right decisions. Reactive, you're just in a fight or flight zone of what's the next thing that's about to go wrong, let's fix it, and you often lose the clarity and the forward thinking abilities that you would naturally need to do those effectively and to do that thinking effectively.
Very good. So I think we've got time for one more question. So how can cross-functional collaboration between compliance, operations and business units be improved? Louise, maybe if I come to you first with that.
Well, I was just reflecting on some of the stuff that we've already said on the call about making sure that you don't treat compliance as the department to avoid, the department of no. So, and also one of the ways that you can think about that is to think of compliance as not being just the responsibility of one individual department and everybody else gets to go, well, that's nothing to do with me. It's actually surely a shared responsibility. So it's got to be embedded in all of your different business workflows. Kate talks about you've got to understand the business, you've got to understand every element of it. But the business also needs to understand, their role and the role they play in making sure that the whole organization stays compliant. So I think, moving it on from being seen as something that other people do, unhelpful people who merely say no do, to something that is a shared responsibility and that we all have to put our shoulders to the wheel for.
Very good. Kate, would you add anything to that?
No, I absolutely agree with what Louise said, but I would also say collaboration starts with having a seat at the table and everyone having a seat at the table. So you can't collaborate if you're stuck behind a door and everyone else is talking about it. So coming back to the point of culture and how you treat compliance and how you engage with compliance comes back to having a seat at the table and then respecting and valuing what everyone has to say, whether you truly believe it or you don't believe it. It's actually listening. And I have to say, I have worked in some environments where collaboration is absolutely key and it's a core value and you have to embrace it whether you like it or not. And I've worked in other environments where it's very much a dictatorial kind of environment and you are told what to do and you can't collaborate. But from my experience, collaboration is such a genuinely lovely thing to be part of. It empowers you. It allows you to bring value. It allows you to feel valued in a business, and to have a really good, effective compliance function, they have to be able to collaborate. And it comes back to, how you're perceived and everything I've said about going around saying hello to everyone, and also the soft skills that you need to do compliance. So your ability to influence, your ability to negotiate, your ability to maybe bite your tongue in scenarios where you just want to say, I've told you this 50 times already, I don't want to repeat it. But collaboration in my mind is absolutely essential to do a good job in compliance.
Yeah, I think
I'm sure Louise.
Yeah, I think Kate's telling us you can't collaborate with the department if you lock it in the broom cupboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to let it out every now and again. Pete, anything that you'd add to that?
I'd sum it up as understanding, and as Louise and Kate have both pointed out, it's two-way understanding, which is an element that's sometimes lost. Throughout my whole career, you get to the end of enforcement actions or litigation, and it's only at that stage, the first time, when everyone, all the stakeholders, sit around a table and discuss the problem from the very beginning. And there's this sudden realization of misunderstanding or alignment that could only happen once that dialogue starts to open. If you ask whether it's compliance speaking to the business or the business speaking to compliance, if you just ask someone to do something, provide an end result without explaining the context or its purpose or why, to me, that the chances are whatever solution they come up with won't be the best solution that they can do. It's only when they understand where it comes from and what it's intended to do, then you suddenly get that, oh, well, I can do what you've asked, but actually, if I do it this other way, I think it's going to do it better, or it's going to do this other thing for you. And it's that understanding, when you understand each of the roles and you have that communication, and to Kate's point, that dialogue, that emerges.
Yeah. So we've spoken a lot about culture today, which is really interesting, and that is probably a key takeaway for our audience, that thinking about culture and where compliance fits and how it interrelates to the rest of the business is a key part of ensuring that things run smoothly. So that is our time. Those questions that we haven't got to, as I mentioned, we can follow up online. Thank you for sending them in. And then thank you very much to our panel, Louise, Pete, Kate. Thank you. It's been super illuminating. I think we've all learned a lot. I know I have. So thank you for your time. And with that, I will hand back to Jack.
As we wrap up this strategy booster session, we leave you with 4 comprehensive takeaways to put into action right away. Number 1, embedded compliance early. Make compliance a launchpad, not a roadblock. Involve compliance at the concept stage to shape innovation rather than constrain it. This reduces rework and builds speed through foresight. Number 2, adopt AI and automation with purpose. Use tech to serve strategy, not the other way around. Design AI and automation around specific outcomes to improve accuracy, scalability, and auditability. Number 3, build a culture that values compliance. Culture makes compliance thrive. Empower teams to question, collaborate, and speak up, turning compliance into a trusted commercial enabler, not a blocker. And number 4, focus on targeted risk-based data management. Data is only powerful when it's purposeful. Focus on higher impact risks and structure insights for faster, sharper decisions and clearer narrative for regulators and stakeholders. We hope these insights boost your strategy and bring fresh momentum to your compliance efforts. This brings us to the end of today's session. A big thank you to our speakers, Louise, Pete, and Kate, for joining and for sharing their expertise. Thank you, Adam, for moderating the discussion. Finally, thank you everyone for attending the webinar. We hope you found the discussion valuable. If your questions wasn't answered during the session, don't worry, a member of the Vixio team will be in touch to follow up. As a reminder, you will receive the full webinar recording directly in your inbox in the coming days. And if you'd like more information or have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@vixio.com. For more information on anything covered in today's webinar, be sure to visit vixio.com. On behalf of everyone here at Vixio, thank you again for taking part. We look forward to welcoming you to our future webinars. Take care and goodbye for now.